He like was on anyone's radar this season, but I watched Chimere Dike every single week. I know someone who coached Dike, so I always kind of rooted for him, even when he transferred away from my Badgers. Now, I usually don't talk too much about work ethic, since I think it's hard for me to fairly evaluate this as someone who doesn't talk or see the players in person. However, in Dike's case, I know one of his coaches who raved about his character and work ethic. Hey y'all! For this video, we'll continue to be going through the 2025 wide receiver prospects, covering Bru McCoy from Tennessee, Chimere Dike from Florida, Daniel Jackson from Minnesota, Felton from Virginia Tech, and Dominic Lovett from Georgia. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details on how I do my grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the receivers from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link in the description. For new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for receivers like Andrew Armstrong and Bo Collins, which you can check out on my channel as well. I'll be continuing to go through my top 50 wide receivers in the draft, so be sure you don't miss any other parts of the wide receiver series or any other positional group series in the future. Be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at McCoy. Starting things out with Bru McCoy from Tennessee. After being a highly coveted recruit, he has been a bit of a shell of himself and had an underwhelming 2024 season, getting just 64 targets and converting those to 39 receptions for 472 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now the good thing is he did a good job holding on to the ball when he was targeted, as he had just 2 drops, which translates to a 4.9% drop rate, which is pretty good. Also, he played the majority of snaps from the outside. For his highlighted games against Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama, he got double digits targets with 11 against Alabama, but this unfortunately was the only time he managed to do this in all 12 of his games this season, and he had no more than 8 targets in any other game for 2024. He also had 6 receptions and 80 yards against Alabama, which he only managed to get more than 5 receptions in one other game this season, and more than 80 yards in just 2 other games. Also, McCoy did have his 2 drops against Alabama, so that's not ideal as he had those 2 drops in one game, but if we want to be optimistic, he didn't have a single drop on his other 53 targets throughout the rest of the season. But to know how optimistic we should be about him, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he catches the ball with good hand technique and consistently catches it away from his body. He's very comfortable attacking the ball at the end of his frame and is capable of making difficult adjustments to throws. He even showed good awareness around the sidelines to finish catches there, as well as over his shoulders. He can also finish tough catches thanks to his ability to play like a basketball player and box out defenders with his frame. That being said, I would notice a few times when it seemed like the ball would sneak up on him, and that has me concerned about his ball tracking skills being not as good as highlights might suggest. Also, while his hands aren't good, he really struggled to finish contested catches with just a 37.5% success rate, which has steadily decreased over these past few years. So McCoy gets off to a solid start with a B for his hands, and a B+ for his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, there are definitely a lot of improvements needed in his route running, as we'll discuss soon, but he is capable of making some sharp cuts at times in his routes. The problem with those sharp cuts though is that they often come at the expense of quickness and efficiency. He typically needs a lot of times to make those cuts, which allows the defender to catch up and cover it and essentially make that extra effort go to waste. To make things worse, he often needs extra couple steps as well to be able to pull off his cuts, which further slows the process and helps the defense. When he does execute his cut, he has little explosiveness, which doesn't let him make up for any inefficiencies in the process. He also does try to throw some fakes in every now and then, but they are pretty ineffective and don't fool defenders. He just really struggles to get separation, often just tries to outmuscle defenders, which contribute to his very inconsistent production. To make matters worse, he just runs a very limited route tree and has lapses finding openings against zone despite being a veteran player. His release is also really messy with poor use of his long arms. He also doesn't have quick enough feet to be able to beat defenders, and again, just often relies on plowing through them through their press. So unfortunately, McCoy does end up crashing back down to earth with a D+ for his route running and a D for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he runs a great pad level and can power through tackles with his strength. Though they don't work every time, he does have good timing in his cuts as well to be able to sometimes make defenders miss in space. He also has a good transition upfield and runs with solid vision. Unfortunately though, he just looks stiff and clunky at times as an athlete. He also lacks good top speed and acceleration to separate downfield or contribute much after the catch other than running through defenders. Also, he does have some off-the-field stuff that NFL teams will need to investigate both from an injury and possible criminal standpoint. So I just kind of have a hard time seeing him having a big impact with a team with all this. He isn't that great of an athlete, his hands can be iffy and were a bit exposed with more volume against Alabama, and he's a limited route runner and separator. He is a good blocker, but I just don't see a player that will likely be an NFL starter in the future, unfortunately. So McCoy's fall continues with just a C+ for his yards after catch potential, and C- for his future role. For his athleticism or RAS score, he hasn't completed any athletic testing at the time of writing this, so I had to estimate this grade. His grade of a B may seem generous based on what I described, however larger receivers can often be covered by their size, which I felt like could help him finish as a B. For a summary of his strengths, he's a very physical receiver with good contact balance to pick up extra yards after the catch. Also, he's physical when fighting for contested balls by using his big frame to box out defenders. His big frame also shines when making ball attacks to give him a good catch radius. Finally, he is a very good blocker, which could give him an outside chance of getting some playing time on a run-first team. That being said, he just seems like a disappointing athlete who lacks great burst in his cuts to be able to get yards after the catch or generate separation. What also impacts his separation is underdeveloped route running and his poor release that allows defenders to get in his hip pocket at the start of the route. Finally, he does have some major off-the-field questions that NFL teams will need to do their research on and could potentially take him off their list altogether. By taking the average of all his grades, McCoy earned a 2.33 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier. I just don't really feel that optimistic about McCoy, unfortunately. He certainly has good ball skills and a good frame, however neither is special enough to warrant him being on a roster other than for jump ball situations. Also with his off-field issues, even if a team is considering taking him on day 3, they may just decide to avoid the potential headache and target a player with less perceived risk. As for a comp, I have Des Fitzpatrick as his comp. Both have solid frames and a wide catch radii. Both also bring some physicality to the position that can make them stand out. However, neither are great route runners and lack explosiveness in their cuts to be able to make them consistent playmakers. Also, both are a bit stiff and poor accelerators, which impacts them after the catch as well. Fitzpatrick had a short-lived career, and I feel the same could likely happen for McCoy. Maybe he can recapture that magic that made him a heavily recruited prospect. However, he just doesn't look like the same player and unfortunately just hasn't looked like an NFL caliber player these past few years. Moving to our next receiver, Chimere Dike from Florida. Starting with a look at his basic stats, he didn't get a lot of targets or receptions with just 65 targets and 42 receptions. However, he did manage to put up 783 yards, which turns into an average of 18.6 yards per catch, which is impressive. His touchdowns and drops were less impressive though, catching just 2 touchdowns and having 4 drops for a drop rate of 8.7%. After playing nearly full time from the outside in 2023 with the Badgers, Dike was used as a Z receiver being used in motion and playing more from the slot with a bit of an edge of his snap distribution going to the slot. As for his highlight games, we can kind of see the roller coaster for Dike and the rest of Florida pass catchers. With quarterback Graham Mertz out for the majority of the year, and DJ Lagway not quite ready to be a starting quarterback just yet, the pass catchers sometimes had some really ugly games. That led to Dike having at least 5 receptions in only 3 of his 13 games. But when looking at his highlight games and starting with the good, he had a good 9 targets which he converted to a very good 5 receptions and 95 yards against Texas. Now, full disclosure though, Florida got blown out against Texas and Dike only had 2 receptions for 46 yards when the game was somewhat competitive, which does take away some of the shine. His Ole Miss game was also pretty solid with 3 receptions for 54 yards in a competitive game. His Georgia game though was a very poor performance with just 2 receptions for 8 yards, but the team also only passed for 113 yards for the whole game, so no receiver really had a great game. But to know if he's better than his stats indicate, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he does a really good job extending out his hands on the ball to be able to make some nice adjustments to misplaced throws. He also gets finished catches through contact and even rise through that contact. To help him be successful in contested catch situations, with a success rate of 58.3% in 2024 and 51% for his career. What also helps him be successful is his tendency to work back to the quarterback to make an easier throwing window. One of the more disappointing things about Dike though that held him back at Wisconsin was his inconsistent hands. He had a drop rate of 8.7% in 2024, which was actually pretty good compared to the rest of his career, as he has a career drop rate of 10.9%. His hands are just too inconsistent and seem slow at getting to the ball with good hand technique. He also didn't always look confident when he was making catches at his waist or below. Also, he seemed to lack confidence in his attacks around the balls, as he can sometimes mistime his jumps and show lapses in his ball tracking. He can also struggle to establish good position on 50-50 attempts due to needing to focus too much on the ball. So Dike has a very rough start with just a C- for his hands. However, he does get some solid grades with a B for his jump ball and contested catch, and a B- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he does a good job navigating around contact on his routes to keep his momentum in the right direction. He also has good experience running routes at all levels and from all across the formation. Not only has he played at every spot, but he also was used in motion a lot this year, adding some versatility. Though he didn't play much from the line this past year, he has solid release skills with nifty footwork and good hand use. Unfortunately, his route running is pretty rough for someone with his experience. He typically rounds a lot of his cuts due to running them at full speed without use of tempo. He also runs himself out of openings against zone coverage instead of slowing up to stay open. With all his rushing and urgency, he can also sometimes struggle to find openings when the play breaks down as well. When he does try to make more sharp cuts, he needs extra steps to gather himself. Regardless of what type of cuts he makes, his breaks lacks explosiveness, which contributes to his struggles getting consistent separation. He even struggled to get consistent separation on his vertical routes despite his great speed. The issue is that he just doesn't often show good knowledge of how to use deception to separate downfield consistently. So Dike continues the B train with B- in his route running and release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he was on anyone's radar this season, but I watch Chimere Dike every single week. I'm not a Florida fan, but I do want to admit some bias as I am a Dike fan. For context, I know someone who coached Dike, so I always kind of rooted for him, even when he transferred away from my Badgers. Now, I usually don't talk too much about work ethic, since I think it's hard for me to fairly evaluate this as someone who doesn't talk or see the players in person. However, in Dike's case, I know one of his coaches who raved about his character and work ethic. That work ethic showed in his blocking, as he was always a very willing blocker. Also, he showed off his speed at the combine, running a 4.34 40-yard dash and having a near-perfect RAS score. Despite his speed, he isn't that big of a factor after the catch, unfortunately. He can sometimes have a bit of a hitch when transitioning upfield after the catch, and in general looks a bit stiff with his change of direction ability. Also, he lacks wiggle to make defenders miss, which is especially bad for him since he'll typically go down after first contact. Finally, while he has good effort as a blocker, he often has trouble getting square with his target and uses poor hand placement. While he is a bit of a mixed bag prospect as not having one clear strength outside of his testing athleticism, I do want to believe in his work ethic based off what I've heard. Also, he at least showed the versatility to play all over the formation and ran nearly every type of route to hopefully find his way onto an NFL roster. So Dike unfortunately got off the B train and got on the C train, with a C+ for his yards after catch potential, and C for his future role. However, he got to a good final destination with an A for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has a good frame and does a good job extending his arms to the ball to have a great catch radius. Those arm extensions also let him regularly convert contested catch situations. Also, he's a very versatile receiver with experience at every receiver spot, being used in motion and running nearly every route. That'll make him an easier fit into any NFL offense that he ends up going to. He also has great straight line speed, which can make him even more appealing to NFL teams. Also, I think he will stand out during interviews from everything I've heard about his work ethic and character. Now, despite all the great things I heard about him, I did see some very concerning things on his film, including his shaky hands and lapses in ball tracking, which led to drops and missed opportunities. Also, I saw they had some misreads against zone coverage, which is disappointing given his veteran experience. His sloppy route running is also disappointing to see, as this is also something that I wouldn't expect for a player with his amount of experience. His sloppy route running is also disappointing to see, as I wouldn't expect that from a player with his amount of playing time. Finally, while he tested great athletically, he is a bit of a stiff athlete, which limited how many yards he could consistently get after the catch. So by taking the average of all his grades, Dike earned a 2.5 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. While I'm rooting for him, I just have to be honest about his limitations and not let my bias blind me. He has some exciting physical traits, but is just still so raw as a route runner and a pass catcher to feel comfortable having him higher. Those two things are unfortunately two of the most fundamental things you need to have as a receiver, so lacking both makes it really hard to see him earn a meaningful role in the NFL. As for a comp, I'll use his history as a Badger player and go with another former Badger, Nick Toon. Both have better than expected athleticism and solid release skills. Also, both are consistent with attacking the ball in the air, however both lack explosiveness and polish in their routes to get consistent separation. Also, both struggle with drops, which can take some of their shine away when they do try to make catches away from their frame. Toon has a career cut short due to injuries, but looked like he may have been working himself into being a receiver 3 for a team. I think Dike does have the talent to get similar level of contribution, however he absolutely needs to become a more reliable pass catcher or be at risk of losing snaps in a possible roster spot for more reliable receiver options. Going to our next receiver, Daniel Jackson from Minnesota. Looking at his basic stats, we finally have a bigger producer with 115 targets and 75 receptions. However, his receiving yards and touchdowns were a bit of a letdown with just 863 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also, while he did have 5 drops, this is why drop rates does matter since it's just a 6.3% drop rate due to getting 115 targets. Now that still isn't great, but it isn't as bad as many may think when they hear 5 drops in a season. He also did most of his damage from the outside this season. Looking at his highlighted games against Penn State, Illinois, and Michigan, he at least chose good times to be able to make plays, as those were some of his better games in the season despite going against some of his toughest competition. In all the highlight games, he had at least 8 targets and 5 receptions. Also, his yardage totals were pretty good, with Michigan being the lowest of the highlighted games, but still getting 58 yards. Look at the rest of his games, he was often a regular contributor with more than 5 receptions in 7 of his 12 games, and getting at least 70 yards in 6 of his 12. He didn't score too many touchdowns outside of his game against Maryland, but quarterback play and play call around the red zone had a part to play in that. So now that we can see that he can produce, let's take a look at some of his grades to see if he can also produce some good grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, when he's going for the catch, he's not afraid to make a catch through contact. He has great concentration to convert those situations, with a contested catch success rate of 57.6% for 2024 and 50% for his entire career. Also, he's very capable of making some difficult adjustments to make plays on balls that are off target. Though Jackson's hands don't look too bad when you look at his advanced stats, they are really frustrating when you're watching play to play. He's a major culprit of body catches and does my biggest pet peeve of receivers by jumping up in the air to body catch the ball instead of just snatching it with his hands. That lack of regular arm extension further limits his already limited catch radius. When he does extend for the ball, his hand technique can be a bit shaky, leading to some drop issues. So due to his poor habits, Jackson earned just a D+ for his hands, but then steadily improved with a C for his jump ball and contested catch, and a B- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, while his hands didn't impress me, his route running did stand out to me. He has quick feet that lets him make snappy, sharp cuts in his routes. He also uses that shiftiness to use good stem fakes to get some good separation. He also shows good nuance in his routes by running with varied tempos to get the defense trouble getting a read on his route. His understanding how to manipulate defenders as a route runner showed a great timing and awareness of how to sell his vertical before breaking back to the quarterback. He also shows good awareness of finding openings against zone coverage and how to avoid contact on his route to get to his spot. That being said, his release is a bit concerning. Sometimes it can look really good, but the more you see it, the more it becomes clear he may have a limited release package. That lack of variety will make it very easy for better cornerbacks to be able to stop him in the NFL. Also, he doesn't often use his arms well enough to separate, and doesn't have quick enough feet to let him consistently win against press. His route running did look good in those routes that he ran, but he also seemed to have a limited route tree. He also needs to prove that he can finish routes through redirections from linebackers. Sometimes he would avoid their interference, but a number of times he would greatly shift his path, which messed up the timing of his route and would lead him to not be ready for the ball when the quarterback needed him. So Jackson continued his climb with a B for his route running, but stumbled with a C- for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, after making the catch, he has a natural transition to turn upfield and uses good vision to use his blocks. He also uses his shiftiness with good timing in his cuts to make defenders miss in space. Finally, he is a willing blocker who does a good job getting leverage in his blocks. Though his feet are quick, he lacks explosiveness needed to frequently make defenders miss in open space though. Also, his long speed is lacking, which further caps his impact after the catch. Also, despite being a willing blocker, his hand placement is poor to non-existent at times. He often just ends up throwing his body at defenders instead of using his arms and hands to be able to effectively keep his block going longer. Jackson is another case of a player who I'm not sure if he'll have a clear role in the NFL. He does have some solid route running skills, but I'm just not sure if it's good enough to be able to really make an impact in the NFL. He kind of just feels like a player who may make a bit of a noise in preseason, but have trouble making the roster in the final cuts. So Jackson plateaus with a C+ for his yards after catch potential, C- for his future role, and B- for his estimated athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his traits, though it's not always pretty, he is good at finishing catches through contact. Also, he has quick feet that show with his shiftiness in open space and his snappy cuts in his routes. He also showed veteran feel for his routes, being able to add some really good nuance and quickly diagnose openings against zone defense. That being said, his tendency to go for body catches is really frustrating and really limits his catch radius at his size. Also, his minimal release package and route tree makes him a little bit more limited than some of his consistent production may suggest. His lack of explosiveness and long speed will also likely be very limiting as well, especially in his ability to separate against man coverage in the NFL. So by taking the average of all his grades, Jackson earned a 2.12 out of 4, which puts him in my unlikely to contribute tier. Unfortunately, Jackson just kind of feels like an average player at best to me. While he can make some nice catches, his film is littered with unnecessary body catches which will catch up to him in the NFL. Also, his lack of great speed and burst will likely catch up as well and further limit his separation ability. I think his best route to be able to get a roster spot and playing time is by continuing to expand his route tree and improve his arm extensions when making catches to expand his catch radius. Otherwise, I think coaches will prefer players with more athletic upside or more reliable catching habits. As for a comp, I have Taywan Taylor as Jackson's comp. Both have shiftiness and solid route running fundamentals and can also bring some nuance to their routes to keep the defense on their toes. However, both can struggle with body catches and have a smaller catch radius than their peers. Also, both run limited route trees which will need to be expanded for the NFL. Taylor had a pretty short NFL career after getting early play time, and maybe Jackson can also get some early playing time thanks to his route running. Going to our next receiver, Felton from Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech didn't have too much of a passing game this year, but they did have some ridiculous athletes, including Felton, who measured in at 6'5", 213 pounds. As far as a look at his basic stats, they were pretty underwhelming with just 62 targets for 32 receptions and 360 yards and 2 touchdowns. What was more significant though, unfortunately, was his number of drops with 5 for the season, which equaled out to a drop rate of 13.5%, which is very high. Also not surprising with his size, but he played the majority of snaps from the outside. Looking at his highlight games against Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Miami, things start out actually looking really good with his Clemson game with 12 targets, 6 receptions, and 68 yards. Now, it is troubling that nearly 20% of his targets, receptions, and yards all came in that game, but at the very least, it was against a quality opponent, which, if you're going to do that in a game, at least do it against a good opponent. What doesn't make him look better, though, is the rest of his highlight games with just 3 receptions for 25 yards against Georgia Tech and a miserable 1 reception for 4 yards against Miami, despite everyone torching Miami this year. The rest of his games were much of the same, failing to get at least 5 receptions in all of his 12 games outside of his Clemson game, and only getting 30 or more yards in 4 of his games. So his build is interesting, but the production isn't there, so let's take a look at some of his grades to see if his grades are there. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he has a huge catch radius and is even more impressive at times when he finishes catches at the very end of his frame. He can also have very good timing with his ball attacks to give him a major edge if a ball is anywhere near him. Some receivers struggle to catch the ball away from their frame, which ends up limiting their catch radius, but Felton does a great job consistently using arm extensions to make the catch, which helped him succeed on 53.3% of his contested catch opportunities. Also, he showed the ability to be able to finish catches over his shoulders and even flashed some impressive ball skills, making catches with his fingertips. Unfortunately, he showed a lot of struggles catching the ball than just standard targets, though. He seemed to lack focus, reeling in the ball, and sometimes had suboptimal hand technique in his catch attempts. The crux of his issue could be a trouble with his ball tracking, but it for sure had to do with his approach to balls. He often looked like he was lacking confidence and could be a bit awkward in his approach. That led to passive attempts at times and poor ability to finish those catches. So Felton ended up having a bit of progression in his grades as well, with a D+ for his hands, C+ for his jump ball and contested catch, and B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he has good use of his arms and his release to help create a bit of separation. Also, he has some solid foot speed to have another option to lean on to win in his release. His use of both often lets him get some early leverage, and he knows how to use his body to shield off the defender. He also knows how to shield off the defender when running vertical patterns that he's comfortable stacking his defender. With his shifty feet, he also uses those to help his route running to have some quick cuts. For a player his size, he does look pretty fluid in his routes at times, which makes his potential exciting. However, he ran a very limited route tree, which will be a barrier for him getting early playing time in the NFL. For routes he did run, he often didn't have enough hip sync to make sharp cuts, which led to rounded cuts and inconsistent separation. He would also give up leverage when he was trying to adjust for the quarterback scrambling. In those situations against zone coverage, he also seemed to struggle to find open space to settle in. Also, his release may be a little bit more limited than it came off in college due to having a limited release arsenal. So Felton ended up getting a C for his route running and a C+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, after a catch he has a quick transition and can sometimes use his balance and shifty feet to avoid tackles. He is also a solid athlete at his size. He isn't the quickest or fastest, but at 6'5" he offers a unique blend that will make him very appealing to teams trying to chase potential. That's the thing though, he is just a lot of potential, but I'm not certain there's a lot of substance right now. He has great size and shows great flashes on the field, but he was so inconsistent as a contributor on the field, as we saw with his poor production. Plus, it's not like he's a young prospect. He'll be about 24.5 years old by week 1 the regular season for his rookie year, so the older age will make his potential development less exciting. Also, I wasn't overly impressed with his blocking. He can sometimes struggle to get square and doesn't use his long arms enough to be able to set quality blocks. No, I wouldn't call him a lazy blocker, but his blocking and lack of physicality can also be disappointing at his size. His ability to get yards after the catch can also be disappointing due to his average at best change of direction ability after the catch. So Felton ended up earning just a C+ for his yards after catch potential, and just a C- for his future role since I'm just not confident in his development at his age. That being said, he did test well athletically for his size, which earned him a B for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has unique size that you can't teach, which gives him a huge catch radius. Also, he does a good job catching the ball away from his body by extending his long arms to expand his catch radius to a ridiculous degree. Also, he does show a bit of potential on his routes with good vertical ability and some fluidity in his routes at his size. While he shows potential as a route running among other areas, it's just mostly just potential right now. He runs a limited route tree and has poor technique as a route runner, which will present a challenge for him as he attempts to transition to the NFL. Also, he will absolutely need to improve his hands and reduce the number of drops he has to be able to ensure he doesn't lose opportunities. He can also work to fine-tune his ball attacks to help finish targets more consistently. Finally, he will need to work to have better contact balance after the catch, since it does seem like he has the build or quickness to be able to make defenders miss in space. So by taking the average of all his grades, Felton earned a 2.37 out of 4, which puts him in my need improvement to contribute tier. A team targeting Felton will likely be targeting him for his potential. Now, how capable he is of reaching that potential at the age of 24 is hard to say. I think the biggest barrier for him is his hands. He has the size to at least be a good red zone weapon, but if his hands stay this inconsistent, he won't get a chance to make a play on those situations and he'll be substituted for more reliable pass catchers. As for a comp, I have Mike Strawn as his comp. Both have great frames and could make some big plays, especially down the field. Also, both can make some impressive adjustments to the ball and play at the very end of their frame. However, while both have a lot of potential, both are just so raw. They both struggle as route runners and have inconsistent separation. Also, both don't always show their size with their adjustments to the balls and in their blocking. Strawn faded out of the league very quickly, and I have a bad feeling that the same will happen to Felton. Again, if he does at least improve his hands though, he might have a fighting chance to make a roster. Moving to our final receiver for this part, Dominic Lovett from Georgia. For the 2024 season, he had career highs in targets, receptions, and touchdowns with 91 targets, 59 receptions, and 6 touchdowns, but also unfortunately had a near career low in receiving yards with just 607 yards. Also, he had less than stellar amount of drops with 5 drops or a drop rate of 7.8%. With a smaller build, he did the majority of his damage from the slot. For his highlight games against Notre Dame, the SEC championship game, or the rematch against Texas and Alabama, he mostly had pretty mediocre games outside the Alabama game when he had a respectable 6 receptions for 59 yards. The problem is that he got that off of 13 targets, which is a pretty underwhelming total with that many targets. His performance in the rematch against Texas was also underwhelming and rare as he had 3 receptions but didn't finish with a positive receiving total. That's pretty hard to do in today's college football, but he somehow managed to do it. So with the stats less than impressive for another player, let's see if his grades are any better. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, there honestly wasn't a whole lot of positive I could spin here, but while he didn't get a lot of chances to show it, he did show good ability to finish catches over his shoulders. Part of why I didn't think he got too many downfield opportunities was due to his hands. He often defaults to being a body catcher, and his hand technique is shaky when catching the ball away from his frame, which led to him being worse in contested catch situations than he could have been, and finished with 47.1% success rate. He also seems to have trouble making adjustments to balls off his frame on time. He often has trouble syncing his hands and body adjustments, which led to some drops and missed opportunities. So we unfortunately have one of the worst starts we have with this entire class, with a D+ for his hands, and C- for his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he also showed good shiftiness in his routes with some ability to shake defenders and occasionally make good cuts. However, another reason why he didn't get very many opportunities downfield was due to running a pretty limited route tree. He would occasionally branch out and go out on deeper fades, but most times he was running a hitch or a slant. In those routes, he often struggled to establish leverage and had a hard time shaking physical coverage. Those issues led to inconsistencies in ability to separate. What also led to struggles were a lack of tempo in his routes and explosiveness in his cuts. While he can be shifty, that lack of explosiveness as well as lack of deception made them easy to read and jump. He also showed pretty poor awareness for openings against zone coverage, as he often drift towards defenders instead of settling into an opening. When he was going out on deep routes, he often struggled to stretch the defense or create an easy throwing window for the quarterback. That lack of success downfield and high-rated short routes causes ADOT to be just 7.2 for 2024 and is 8.1 for his entire career, which are both low marks. He also has pretty minimal experience and success against press, which likely will keep him in the slot. So things unfortunately continue to snowball for Lovett, with a D+ for his route running and D for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or wrath, his yards after catch are easily his best attribute. He has a very quick and fluid transition to runner, which helps him be great on screen passes. He also shows his return skills on offense as he runs with good vision and does a good job following his blocks to maximize his opportunities. There are even moments where he manipulates his defenders to seal them off with blocks around him. Also, he runs with good pad level and has good balance to help him survive arm tackles. He also showed some shiftiness in open space to sometimes get defenders to miss or at the very least minimize the hit he received. Now, while I consider his ability after the catch to be his best attribute, I wouldn't consider him great in this area. He is shifty but often lacks the explosive to make defenders miss consistently. Also, his combine speed was good, but his speed on the field looks average to above average at best, which limits his big play potential. So this all kind of just creates an image of a player that I just have a hard time seeing having an impact in the NFL, and will likely have a hard time making an NFL roster. So we finally get a positive grade for Lovett with a B for his yards after catch potential. Unfortunately, short-lived as he earned just a D for his future role and a C for his athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his strengths, he runs a good pad level and has good balance to help survive arm tackles and pick up extra yards. Also, he shows some really nice vision with the ball in his hands to make him a solid option on screen passes. He also has some shifty feet in his routes and after the catch, which could help him elevate his game if he's able to transfer that to his cuts and to make more concise, quick cuts. Finally, if all else fails, he does have experience on special teams as a returner that could give him a fighting chance to earn a roster spot. Unfortunately, I think it will be an uphill battle to make a roster. His hands and ball tracking are both really disappointing, making it hard for him to adjust to throws off his frame and finish catches that a number of receivers could likely handle with ease. Also, he's just so far behind as a route runner and lacks the explosiveness needed to get consistent separation. Also, though his yards after catch ability is his best attribute, I still wouldn't consider it great, which further lowers his floor and erases any possible encouraging ceiling he may have had. So by taking the average of all his grades, Lovett earned just a 1.62 out of 4, which puts him easily in my likely not worth rostering tier. I hate to kick a player while they're down after a disappointing season, but I just don't see an NFL player in Lovett. He's not dynamic enough to be a pure yards after the catch guy, and he's far too raw in all other areas to be trusted. Honestly, the best option could have been switching the running back to best use his pad level and vision. Unfortunately, he's far too light to make the switch now, which has him kind of stuck trying to make it work at receiver. As for a comp, I have Ryan Grant, the receiver and not the running back, as his comp. Both are at their best after the catch and have good contact balance. However, neither are technically sound receivers and have a limited route tree and show questionable feel for the position on their routes. Both also struggle to use nuance and struggle to separate, which makes them often not viable options as passing weapons. Grant had a few moments where he looked like a contributor, but this had more to do with how barren the Washington receiver room looked when he was there. Maybe Lovett could have similar success if he does go to a thin receiver room as well, but you could say that about just about any player. Either way, I just have a hard time seeing him make roster cuts and sticking to a team, unfortunately. And that's all for part 2. Let me know where your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is just part 2 of 10, so there'll be a lot more evals done over the next few weeks. The start has been a bit rough as you don't have too many great players in the early parts of the alphabet, but things will get a lot more interesting in part 3 as Emeka Egbuka and Alec Ayomanu will both be part of that section. So to be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and this series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll have the full written eval for each player out at the same time as the episode. But thank you all and see you all next time.